Now, as members of parliament remain divided on the budget, a financial consultancy, PricewaterhouseCoopers, has said that there are alternatives to the VAT increase. Now, PwC says South Africa should revise the revenue sharing formula within the Southern African Customs Union. It says that this move could save South Africa billions of rands. Now, the SACU agreement provides for duty-free trade between member countries. And Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget speech on the 12th of March proposed a 1 percentage point VAT increase in South Africa, spread over 2 years to raise 43.3 billion rand in tax revenue. Now, to discuss this possible proposal, we are joined now virtually by PwC Africa Tax Policy Leader Kyle Mandy. Kyle, thanks for being with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning to you and to your viewers as well.
I must say, when I saw this, it sounded kind of Trump-esque, if you will. We're going to not be used anymore. We want everything to be reciprocal. Is that how you're thinking in approaching this particular discussion?
In short, no. That's not the thinking. We certainly don't advocate, as I would put it, pulling the rug out from underneath our neighbouring countries and so on. They are heavily dependent on SACU revenues for their own budgets. So no, that's not the approach that we would advocate taking. All we are advocating for is, if you like, a transitioned and phased approach to a more fair and equitable revenue sharing formula. And anything that we do is not going to help us in the short term. It's not going to solve our immediate problems. So no, we don't. We certainly don't view this in the same vein as being Trump-esque, if you like.
But it is, of course, something that could potentially alleviate the current impasse that we have with regard to trying to find some money and increasing VAT, as the finance minister has proposed, not going down well. Now, before we continue, Kyle, perhaps you and I may know what we're talking about, just to bring everybody along. Let's start by just talking about what the Southern African Customs Union is and what it is designed to do since inception.
Yeah, so in essence, it's a free trade agreement between South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini. And what that allows for is duty-free trade of goods between those countries. So in other words, no customs duties on imports between those countries. So that's what it does in a nutshell, and that's obviously a positive. We'd always advocate for greater free trade, if you like. What then happens in terms of that agreement is that the revenues from customs duties and excise duties are shared according to various prescribed formulae. And it's those formulae for the revenue sharing where the major concern lies, at least from a budgetary perspective and fiscal perspective.
So I guess for South Africans, then the question would be, what is the cost to South Africa of this deal, this arrangement in the current context, and also in the form of revenues foregone relating to domestic consumption of dutiable goods?
Yeah, so the main concern lies with customs duties. Excise duties, there is some concern, but that's maybe a lesser issue. So let's focus on customs duties. So the customs duties are shared based on relative imports from or between member countries. So they don't take into account imports from non-SACU members. It simply takes into account the imports from member countries. And in terms of that, South Africa only has about 20% of the total aggregate imports between the SACU member countries. So it only shares in, according to that formula, 20% of the customs revenues. And that's notwithstanding that when you then look beyond SACU in terms of the imports coming into the SACU area, South Africa has over 80% of those imports. So by that measure, South Africa's if you had to do it proportionately, South Africa's only getting about 25% of its share of customs duties. The rest is going to the other member countries in accordance with that formula. And that's where the concern lies. And by our estimates, that comes to nearly 50 billion rand, if you like, that is being redistributed in accordance with that formula to the countries, to the other countries, notwithstanding that the consumption of those of the goods associated with those taxes is actually taking place in South Africa.
And an amount, as you say, which kind of mirrors that shortfall which the finance minister is hoping to recuperate through increase in VAT.
Yeah, purely coincidental. And look, we by no means suggest that South Africa would be able to get an additional 50 billion rand. There's no question that certainly the likes of Lesotho and to a slightly lesser extent Eswatini require the support from the South African fiscus just to keep those economies going and those fiscuses operating. They are low-income countries, unlike the likes of Botswana and Namibia, who arguably don't require the same sort of level of assistance, but they're the ones who actually get the bulk of the revenues. So, I mean, in the best case scenario, you're probably looking at about, possibly saving South Africa 30 billion rand, but and again, I'm going to emphasize over the medium to long term. So we're talking about a 3 to 5 year horizon to transition that into something else, or into some other agreements.
Against the backdrop of what you've just sketched regarding, countries like Lesotho and Eswatini, for example, who really depend on this, because if you look at, how much of that, makes up their GDP, they are kind of reliant on this money. But as you say, there are others perhaps that may be less so reliant on this. So how should South Africa then go about renegotiating the current revenue sharing agreement?
Well, that is inherently political at the end of the day, and I don't want to delve into that. But the question that really needs to be asked is, how much does this cost South Africa? And we've answered at least part of that question already. But what benefits does South Africa get for that investment? And those benefits can be quantitative in the form of trade access to the likes of those countries and so on, and we know what that number is. But there are many other qualitative benefits as well that are not easy to measure in monetary terms that South Africa also gets from that, and it's those that need to be carefully considered and weighed up against what it costs us as a country. So that's really what we're advocating for. We don't have a prescribed position on what the end game should ultimately look like. We're simply saying, and we believe that this should be re-looked at, reconsidered. And we know that South Africa has been trying to renegotiate the revenue sharing formula since 2011. But unfortunately to no success, and not particularly surprising, given that the other countries are so heavily dependent on these revenues. That they're not too keen to renegotiate something that's going to result in reduced revenues for them.
Well, I must say, Carl, thanks so much for sharing that with us, because I think we are at a moment now where South Africa is looking at various possible proposals of where the money can be found, and this certainly is one that you have highlighted. But as you say, at its very rudiments, this is going to be a political conversation. So let's wait and see. At least this has been highlighted as a possibility. Thank you so much, Kyle Mandy, PricewaterhouseCoopers Africa Tax Policy Leader, saying that South Africa should perhaps negotiate with its neighbors for better customs deals to avoid that VAT increase.